I'm here at the Lyric Theatre for my first in-person interview for Ideology Podcast with David Albury, who is the star of the West End hit Olivier-winning Get Up, Stand Up musical that is based on Bob Marley's biography. Just outside the stage door, and we're about to go in. So we're here backstage at the Lyric Theatre with actor David Albury. I've been talking about how excited I am to have him on the podcast, but I'm going to let David introduce himself.
Hi, I'm David Albury. I'm currently starring as Bob Marley in Get Up, Stand Up, the Bob Marley musical here at the Lyric Theatre.
I feel that actors actually are not just representing our stories on screen, but also off screen now. They have a huge voice, and I was interested in so many aspects. You're not just an actor, you're a musician, you have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. So can we start with your Twitter bio? The quote on it was very fascinating to me.
So yeah, the quote on there is FMFN, or Free Minds Fear Nothing, which is actually the name of my clothing label, which is just a small independent clothing label that started just as a t-shirt brand. Originally, I was looking for interesting prints to wear on t-shirts because I started developing the ideas of fashion and how important it was as a statement of identity, and it was just I found it very interesting about what everyone wore and what that sort of said about them and what you could infer about them based on that. And one day I just I printed an image of Martin Luther King on a t-shirt, on a plain white t-shirt, and I just started wearing it around the world. I'd be on holiday and someone would say, "Wow, I love your t-shirt, where can I get one?" And it's nothing more than just a black and white image of Martin Luther King printed on a white t-shirt, but clearly people were sort of crying out for it because it happened again and again and again. So I started printing more of them on t-shirts and just researching the civil rights movement in America and in the UK, and really sort of identifying significant figures who I felt articulated the universal truth, which is free minds fear nothing. It doesn't always. I always find that, especially on the debates around culture and race and sort of class and things like that, these quite contentious topics, that it can put one side against the other. Now, whether or not you believe in an altruistic world, whether you believe in sort of a principle of survival of the fittest, a truth that remains, that holds for everyone, is free minds fear nothing. No matter whether you're at the bottom of the pile, you're the 99% or you're the 1%. Free minds fear nothing, and we're all in this together. Whether or not we're in this together, unified, or whether we're in this for our own personal gain. And it's sort of that universal truth, and what holds true for all people, is something that I'm interested in. Separate to the vision I have for humanity. It's just I believe that's a universal truth, and I think the more people who are aware of that, the greater one's understanding of one's own agency.
Oh, I really love that. Actually, fear is something that I talk a lot about with the guests on the podcast. And it is something that is so endemic that with our media we're constantly being forced to focus on the things that make us afraid, and that I think makes us feel divided. It makes us see the other as other. So how do we overcome our fear?
Well, it's all a perspective, right? And that's easy to say from a comfortable dressing room in the heart of London's West End, doing a wonderful job, living, one of my many dreams. But I've always been so aware that at every stage in life, no matter what you come up against, there is always the opportunity for growth and learning. Until the lights switch off and that's it, you've got no more life to live. There's always something to be gained, because you can choose the prism through which you understand your experiences. If you can train harder at something, someone's criticism might be a perspective that you can learn from, especially with acting. This is actually something I've found, is that obviously you have to pick and choose, and it ultimately the direction you press on in is located within yourself, has to be, your own decision. But perspectives are unique windows into other ways of seeing the world. And so, they should be welcomed where possible. There's a finite amount of time in this life and we can't consider everything, but we should try as much where we can to try and see the world through other people's eyes, just to get a better understanding of existence and how we operate.
Oh, that's really beautifully said. In what ways is acting spiritual?
So, that's a really interesting question. I mean, there is certainly, when you're, delving into a character, or when you're delving into a very focused method of representation, you have to sort of try and understand what goes on between the lines. I don't just mean between the text, I mean sort of, acting is about detail as much as I understand it. You can do an infinite amount of character work. You often hear these stories about how people are method actors, and so they live their lives as the character that they're trying to portray to best, emulate that when they're on screen or wherever, when called upon. Now, what I sort of mean by the gaps is that, you can make concrete decisions of writing down in my diary, okay, what would my character have for breakfast? How would my character respond in this particular situation? What was their childhood like if they haven't got a childhood that's represented in the script? The more work you do like that, the more you kind of have this sort of fluid spirit to kind of exist and play with, because those are kind of concrete things, but just as our life is the kind of concrete accumulation of all our experiences, they're constantly changing as well, depending on new experiences that we encounter. So everything is recontextualized. So the more understanding and the more detail you have of your character, of the life, the more awareness you have of that particular life, the more aware you are and the more in touch you are with the sort of fluid nature of life and how that can change and morph organically and truthfully and with integrity.
Oh, that's incredible that you say that. So you're playing Bob Marley, and he is a global icon who I think, means a lot to the world, but especially to Jamaicans, and they're very protective of his legacy. Were you intimidated in taking this role?
In all honesty, yes. They're so passionate and they are so protective, and they're so it's such a rich culture, like the Jamaican culture, and specifically Jamaicans, but the Caribbean culture is obviously very rich, and they have a strong identity, and there's a strong history that identity stems from. And, you're aware of that even if you're not aware of the history itself, because they are a rich people to be around. And I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time with, people from the Caribbean and Jamaica, growing up and in my life. But you want to know that you can do a piece justice. And actually, when I first got the call to audition, I originally wasn't sure I was going to do it at all. I actually had to have a conversation with my mother, my mum of all people, who just said, don't overthink it. If you're the best person for the job, you'll be the best person for the job. It's not just about who's Jamaican. Otherwise, they'd pick just a Jamaican, you know what I mean? But they wanted to, it's not just about that. It's about someone who, like you say, who can understand the acting art form, because it's not just being Jamaican. It's not sufficient to be Bob Marley. You have to have an understanding of the way Bob Marley saw the world, which was different to the way other Jamaicans saw the world, and that's a major part of the story and a major part of his journey, especially with the Wailers. And it's about being able to, perform that 6 to 8 times a week, consistently with the stamina, and so there's so much that goes into choosing one character, one role, that eventually I realized, just do the work. And also I knew what a challenge it would be, and how much work that could be done, and as a vehicle for growth, even just in the audition process, I knew that it was something I should at least try and attempt to embark on.
Oh, amazing. I saw a clip of you performing one of the songs, and it looks like you're literally doing a HIIT workout. So what did you prepare physically for this role?
I had a great creative team. Ashley Joseph, Naisha Gaudo, Jade Hackett, Shelley Maxwell, those were the choreographers, and Clint Dyer, the director as well. Those are the choreographers, associate directors, and associate choreographers, and also the musical directors of Sean Green. These are all wonderful people, Liam as well, who really conditioned us, all of us who were in the rehearsal process, with achieving our objective of portraying the characters that we were lined up for. They really drilled us hard, and I would never, if possible, until I'm out flat on my back, I'm not going to shy away from the work, because like I said, every opportunity, every second is an opportunity to grow and get better. Mm-hmm. And so the physical demands of the show were just something that I knew it would be a physical show. So I just had to, after the sessions I would do cardio, we would do hours and hours and hours of choreography and dance conditioning, where we would just run the major numbers in the show. But it's exhilarating, and actually, now on stage when you do it, you're able to commit fully. That was one thing about Bob Marley, is you see any performance that he gives, he is committed fully to that performance. So you don't want to feel that you're at any point, even if you are tired, that you're at anything other than max. And that your max is significantly enigmatic or electrifying, that people watching it will feel that.
Oh, that's so exciting. When I was trying to prepare for interviewing you, and I was trying to pick Bob Marley songs, you realize what a body of work, right?
He was so prolific, it's what his focus was. He was always writing, and he just saw music as this vehicle with which to put out this message. And so, for the limited time he had on this earth, he really committed to that. And his catalogue is vast, and one really interesting thing I sort of always feel about Bob Marley's music is everyone knows Bob Marley's music, everyone's familiar, it gets passed down. It's one of those sort of generational torches that everyone passes down, no matter whether you're Jamaican, whether you're African, whether you're British, whether you're whatever, American, everyone knows about Bob Marley. But it was only when I really started working on this show and being around the music within this dramatic context that I really started to hear his music, because the lyrics, the message is so powerful, and can easily it can easily be sort of, I guess, it's easy to just listen to the catalogue in its entirety and sort of just enjoy the sounds and the vehicle, but the message is so piercing that when you really allow yourself to focus on it, it cuts through. I mean, on that, there's the idea of legacy. Obviously the catalogue is huge and the music is extensive, but the sort of legacy of the message and sort of what he did with the Rastafari movement is huge as well. I remember reading a lot. I watched so much footage of him, because there's a lot of archival footage out there on YouTube. I remember him saying, he goes to America and he sees American speaking dreads, and the more and more I look around town, I'm noticing more and more in this country as well. So I think the ideology and the belief system and the belief structure is definitely still growing and still spreading, long after his death. So his legacy is still very much alive.
That's the thing, is I just feel like when you look at the time we live in right now, sometimes it can feel so divisive and so dark and so heavy. And so for me, the opportunity to speak to you about his legacy, which was simple, if you put it down to a few words, it's love and unity. It just seems so powerful. So you had interesting guests. I think the Beatles, Paul McCartney also came to the show. That was wild. How was that like?
I mean, thank goodness they didn't tell us before the show, because there's not many out there like Paul McCartney. But it was wonderful, we found out after we came off the show, they said, oh, by the way, Paul McCartney was in the audience tonight and he'd love to see you on stage. And there were people, I had a friend who was actually sat on the same row as him in the upper circle, and he was just vibing away the whole night and just dancing and shaking and singing along, and just, he was such a pleasant person to meet on stage as well. Just, loved the show, loved the music, loved the message. And it's a great show for attracting, that kind of clientele, really positive thinking artists, because the message is so positive.
Yeah, well, on my channel, I really want to focus more on vibrations and just more spiritual content because it's such a divisive time that we live in. Bob Marley was, almost the originator of high vibe and making people see there's a spiritual side to life and people empowering people and empowerment. What are you personally getting from the role? How is it evolving in your journey?
Again, that's a really interesting question. So it's, I mean, personally, I have a lot of parallel interests, like Bob Marley, obviously a music icon, one of the greatest music legends of all time. So, and the way the show is structured, it's very much structured around a sort of, without giving too much away to those who haven't seen it, it's like a dance hall vibe, very much like a sound system to begin with, and it sort of sets you in that space. And a lot of the music is performed with a live, well, all the music is performed with a live band, but it's a lot of the time the band are on set, like on the stage. I mean, you'll see this all now. But, so as someone who also does music, writes their own personal music, it's a wonderful training, and it's wonderful to kind of live Bob Marley's songs and his music and his story on that stage, and to understand the work that goes into being a successful musician in any era. Bob Marley wasn't an overnight sensation. He had to work hard. There was a lot of obstacles in his way during his come up in Jamaica, in Kingston. It's very different to the troubles that musicians in the modern day face, unsigned musicians in the modern day face. But every era has its own struggles. So it's been reassuring, and also, it's like a spiritual guide that says you can't ever stop pursuing what it is you want, and you have to be wholly committed to that focus and that drive. If it's something you truly want, and if it's on your heart, and if it's in your mind, and if it's in your future, then there's no point worrying about the work. It's just something you just got to do and keep going and keep going.
The thing that I find so inspiring about artists is, for most people, they don't really know what it is they want. How do you tell for yourself, this is something that is in my heart that I have to bring to life, versus I'm just copying someone, I just want the outcome of what Bob Marley was, I want the outcome of what this famous Hollywood person was?
It simply comes down to the fact that irrespective of all those things, you would do it anyway. I'm sure there are some artists and some creatives out there who create art with more of an eye on the success, or with more of an eye on, not the success, because you can be successful and not have the trappings of fame and celebrity and all of that. But there are people who are quite commercially minded, shall we say, whose creative output is very, very much linked to the commercial mechanisms, and to tapping into those commercial mechanisms. And then there are artists who create just for creating's sake, and I think artists, like true artists, is a lifestyle, and it's a muscle, it's a way of interpreting the world that you're desperate to see grow and develop. This is why I think artists, and what I'm learning is why artists want challenging projects. It might not be necessarily you're playing on the main stage at Glastonbury, but you want to play good music with good people, or you might not be playing in the biggest West End show there is, but you'd be telling a real story in an off West End theatre in front of an audience of 50 as opposed to 1,000, where the characters you're playing are multidimensional, they're real people, they're talking about real things that connect with this world. And then the wonderful thing is, outside of the professional environment, you start seeing the world artistically. You start walking down the street, and if it's raining, it's the beauty of the world, that the rain and the elements all come together and create this environment that we're able to, if we are lucky enough, to be able to freely walk and pass through. And that, I think, is why there is so much heart in art, because it directly feeds to the idea of people's freedom and their ability to kind of chart their own course and enjoy life with maximum freedom.
I grew up in a traditional society, religion was how you excised negative feelings. with just praying. But when I moved here, I realized that the culture here is based on Greek culture, where it was, artists were supposed to help you be cathartic, or, to help you process the times. How do you see the projects that you take on, whether it's through music, helping your audience live their lives more authentically or exercise whatever they're going through?
Oh, well, I mean, this show in particular is unlike many of the other shows that are in the West End at the moment, unlike any of the shows that have ever been in the West End. It is so... Bob Marley's message was all about freeing your spirit, your soul, and you yourself rising up and, making this life the life that you want to live. The message of that is so strong in this particular piece that's why it has such an overwhelming effect on the audiences. I've been very surprised, actually. Not surprised because I know the piece, but still to some degree surprised by how many repeat people we have come back to see this show.
Wow.
Because they say on one hand it's, you're learning about Bob Marley as you do with any kind of, biographical piece. You hope to learn something about someone you know about but don't know fully. You're hearing the music, so you're almost at a live concert at times. But at the same time, there's this kind of spiritual awakening that goes on, or this spiritual journey that the piece takes you on. You're watching one man's life, but at the same time, his message was so, penetrating and so inspiring and so electrifying that it wakes people up, and people come out of this show and they think, I feel inspired. I feel inspired by the performances on stage, but I feel inspired by the message and the music. So it certainly has that a strong cathartic element.
Amazing, I'm so excited. Do you have a ritual that you do before being on show?
I sort of do. So, I mean, apart from the sort of warm-up aspect, which I do exactly the same, slightly tailored depending on where the body's hurting, but the same sort of warm-up every day, which is, a number of stretches, and that also is a kind of meditation for me as well. It's sort of a bit of yoga thrown in there, but mostly kind of muscular. And then before the show, I do these double jumps. I do two jumps just before I step into my first sort of spot, and then before I get sort of moved on stage. And that, for me, if I don't do that, that kind of just sets the energy for the piece. Like these two back-to-back enormous like high knee jumps, which is a very odd small ritual, but it's something that I've seen Bob Marley do, and that, and also I sort of chant a little bit. So yeah. And also just to sort of awaken up the spirit in the chest.
So another role that you had that was really interesting was you played Smokey Robinson in Motown. What was that like?
Very different to this. Motown was a very kind of pristine, very clean musical product. Berry Gordy created this palatable vehicle to bring black performers to the white masses and sort of elevate the stature of black performer within American culture and society. So it's very contrasting to this particular role, Bob Marley, which is very gritty, very earthy, and reggae kind of means like from the earth, and from that it's that underlying beat, it's that fundamental. It was so much fun playing Smokey Robinson because he was an artist who I'd always loved. I'd always been obsessed by the music of Motown. And so, it was just a joy to be able to play that role. And I was working alongside some fantastic performers. It was my first West End principal role, so I learned so much. And I was in the role for quite some time.
Oh wow!
So it was just, and it also attracted again like a very diverse audience. You're not your normal, I suppose, West End audience. It attracted everyone from every demographic. And also it was primarily produced by Berry Gordy, so it was wonderful to see a show about black people, created and produced by black people. It just is something you don't often see.
Yeah.
And so it was
very loving, actually. I remember the Diana Ross character with Berry Gordy, and I went to see it ages ago, and it was a really great show.
Mm.
So who are your influences? Music and acting.
Okay, so music influences. I grew up listening to Aretha Franklin. My father was a gospel DJ, so I grew up listening to a lot of gospel music. So James Cleveland, Aretha Franklin, Sam Cooke. He used to play a lot of jazz, so I listened to Chet Baker and Miles Davis. And obviously, very old school. I mean, he's an old school guy. So my foundation, I used to go to bed listening to a selection of those artists plus a bit of Handel. My mum's very into classical music, and my father, loves. But he started developing a real love for ballet, so I started listening to a lot of Tchaikovsky and really everything I could get my hands on. Back in the day with CDs and stuff like that and records, you kind of, you couldn't. It was hard to afford all the CDs you wanted, so I would just raid his collection, and he had a really vast collection. So yeah, it was a lot of that. And as I got older, I became very into hip hop. Listened to a lot of Biggie Smalls, Tupac, Big L, obviously Jay-Z, Eminem, Dr. J, everyone I could get my hands on with regards to that. Really enjoyed Mos Def and Talib Kweli, that Black Star combination as a sort of very kind of political but sort of jazz-infused, moody world. And then in the modern day, I'm a huge fan of artists like Andre 3000, people who kind of very, very creative, borderline wacky, but also very successful commercially. Frank Ocean, I like Tyler the Creator as well. I like people who just build really diverse worlds. Bon Iver as well, as another kind of artist, or Bon Iver. I love people who sort of just sonically push the letter, and do whatever you can to kind of stretch the boundaries of music at the moment. I try and devour as much as possible, so it's
amazing. You can tell you're so passionate about music.
Acting ones as well.
Yeah.
So some of my acting ones, Denzel Washington, love Denzel Washington. Jamie Foxx blows my mind as a performer as well because of his multidisciplinary nature. He can do everything. I also really love Robert De Niro. So I like Al Pacino, Johnny Depp. I like a lot of these artists. They're just real character pieces as well. Like, I'm just fascinated by it. So,
do you think it's a good time or a bad time for this whole medium for artists? I mean, I know comedians and others are always scared, and people are always talking about cancel culture. What do you think about that?
It's a necessary time. I mean, cancel culture is a real thing. Like, people will try and cancel you, but I think people will always, if you speak your truth and you live your life and you're constantly doing that process of reevaluation and contextualizing yourself to decide, that where you plant your flag is truly where you still stand, because society changes, and we are a product of the societies we're brought up in to some degree. Socialization is a real force. So, it's about being aware of that and then deciding actually, where your morals lie and the future you want to kind of carve out and create. And in so doing that, you will always have the people who support you. Kanye West is a really divisive figure, but there are still people who support him. I like to read the comments of things that people post, and people still support him, even though many people have had turn their back on him. And I'm not saying one side is right or the other. Kanye West is just one man, and he is one man with one man's views. And some people will tolerate those views and agree with those views, and some people will say, actually, I don't want to listen to those views anymore. And so we all have always had the power of cancel culture. We can switch off our TVs if we don't want to hear what the news are saying. It's still, the forces are still working around us, but I think, if you're doing the right work, if you're doing good work and you're constantly making sure that is at the focus of then you only have yourself to answer to.
What do you personally feel? Do you tune into popular culture? So, for example, you being black and Jewish, what do you think of him, Kanye?
It's an interesting one, because I always feel that when people highlight one specific cultural attribute or attribute of a person or an individual that's separate to the grievance that they're focused on or that they have a particular issue with, it conflates the issue. It's almost arbitrary, and this person, whoever Kanye has an issue with, it might be they might be Jewish, but he doesn't have an issue with them being Jewish. So why mention that they're Jewish? Why not just mention the grievance, the person, so that people know to stay away from that person, because they can bring that type of grievance. This is my issue, is that, you know,
why make it about
that part of the identity?
I completely agree with you, because I felt like that, you know, after 9/11, everywhere you went, it was just Muslim this and Muslim that, and you just always felt, what does this political thing have to do with the fact that, you know, it's, why are you all putting us all in one basket, you know? And it must be quite awful, actually, just having to. It's making me realize, you know, now it's, you know, you hear people say about why it's this, and I think we have to get to a point where we talk about where speaking this way is not acceptable.
No, it's you know, I don't want to say the media, because the media is not all bad, and that I'd be doing exactly the same thing
to them
as you know, that I feel is done in kind of
media.
It's not that, you know, there are some aspects of the media that misrepresent truth, that are purposefully divisive because they're looking for clickbait. But, you know, we have to be aware of the whole framework, and it is difficult, but, you know, it's like we say, we have to try our best to understand why the people that those with malicious intent are tapping to, or pandering towards, or inciting or gaslighting. That we have to understand what their troubles are. Whilst they might not.
Sometimes it's just financial gain, right?
And you know, often it is. But we live in a world where, you know, money is power. You know, Elon Musk just bought Twitter, and Twitter is effectively, you know, the last marketplace of speech, you know, of communicating ideas. And
it'll be interesting to see if he does to them what they. Okay, so can we talk a little bit about your music? Your artist name is IMD.
IMID, yeah.
IMID.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So, growing up in a sort of, you know, with a multitude of cultural influences. You know, my mother is Ghanaian, born in Ghana. She's also from a mixed heritage background. My father was, you know, is Jewish and was, you know, family come from Eastern Europe, but he's very much British. So there's a whole host of different cultures going on in my family, and extended family. And obviously, growing up in London and in the UK. You know, questions of identity are just quite prevalent. You know, am I Jewish? Am I not? Am I this? Am I black? Am I white? What's going on here? You know, for all intents and purposes, I thought I was, you know, grey, in this grey area. So that's always been quite central. And when I was thinking about my own voice and how I want to present myself and the art that I wish to put out, I was like, well, identity is the foundation of all that it's at the heart of everything I do, whether it be, you know, encouraging people to choose their own identity, find their own identity, discover it through music or fashion or you know, political ideology and practice. That really matters to me, and that's the core theme that runs through every single piece that I do, whether it be whichever discipline, you know, music or fashion or anything. So, and obviously my name is David, my birth name is David, so ID, this was ID, it's very much my identity, but it's very I, David. And it's also, when I wrote it down for the first time, the way I list it is a small I, then a dash, and then a capital D, which is actually, so it's also can be read as I'm smiling.
Okay.
So,
yes.
So it's just to like, I'm smiling, like, you know, because a lot of the time people have sort of like a stank face on, and it's like, no, I'm smiling, I'm just listening, or I'm just, you know, I'm just digesting, but I am smiling.